Horses and Iron Horses. Tragic Tale of Thunderbolt. I was deposited into Dr. Caselli's familiar therapy room by a new, very large Samoan orderly. As each session started, Drs. Garcia, Brandon, and Hyder greeted me from their iPad chat windows. Caselli smiled. "Richard, it is nice to see you. I have found alternating your distant memories with your more recent flashback stories has afforded us with a unique viewpoint into what appears to be your reality and your fiction. Therefore, Richard, I would like us to use that as our format going forward. We'll change it as we decide, if necessary. You will share a set of memories, and then you will share flashbacks and memories and so forth. Will that work for you, Richard?" "Yes, of course," I replied. I nodded, as if I had much choice. Caselli looked to the iPad doctors. "Do you, any of you, have anything you would like us to cover, or to refine our process?" The iPad windows all pulsed as the doctors replied at the same time. "Yeah, sure, fine." It was sort of a cacophony of agreement. But Dr. Hyder continued to speak excitedly. "Richard, I love your flashback stories so much. I find they offer much more insight to how you think and how you process things, especially showcasing your current self versus your old self." Dr. Caselli grinned. "Yes, Richard, your current self is of top interest. Your old self provides contrast and insight into your core self and values. Richard, please proceed sharing your stories and memories." And so I began retelling memories. As a young boy, at maybe 7 years old, my mother and grandfather wanted to make sure my sisters and I all had a chance to ride horses like they did, given that my grandfather had previously bought a dude ranch in Oracle, Arizona. We'll talk more on that later. And loved the idea of horseback riding, being a cowboy in the Wild West, especially because he was a New York City slicker himself. So horses were something that he would never had growing up. My grandfather paid to buy riding lessons for us, and later to buy a pony named Thunderbolt, and to rent a stall for him to be kept in. Officially, my grandfather would say that he helped my mother pay for everything, but we had no spare money, so it was entirely my grandfather's generosity without any need of it to be recognized. My mother made sure the pony was cared for and that we had opportunities to play with him, groom him, feed him, and ride him. It was a major commitment to have a pony, given how poor we were. It was utterly amazing. It was a huge thing for my sisters. I think it gave them a kind of self-esteem boost just knowing that they owned a pony. And it gave them something to look forward to. For me, it was fun and interesting. But it was just another thing to be interested in at the time. I was interested in everything. How did Thunderbolt get his name, you might wonder? Cynthia named him Thunderbolt right off because he was unpredictably willing to bolt left or right, and sometimes he would rear up and jump forward, leap into gallops. His heart, legs, eyes, ears, and mouth were full of thunder. Thunderbolt was the family pony, and we were excited. I rode our pony Thunderbolt nearly every weekend, but he was a mean pony, as he loved to run under trees and branches in apparent hopes of knocking his rider off, or at least hurting them. It was the hallmark of his name. He bolted into trees and zigzagged to dismount his rider. He waited until opportunity availed itself and then raced towards or jumped under a tree. He was smart and mean and full of aggressive thunder. Alas, Thunderbolt saw me as a little off one fated day, and he dashed and would not stop and began running and turning sharply. He never stopped. Eventually, I fell off into a big manure pile. but it did not break my fall like television. No, I broke my arm in 2 places across several bones. The visual? My arm had a section of bone broken off and rotated inside the flesh, remarkably not cutting through the skin, though it was raising it over an inch. My mother did not want to call an ambulance despite that injury, to save money. But she did take me to the emergency room. I laid in the back of her station wagon holding my own arm pieces together in incredible pain and agony as she drove to the hospital. Once the break was set and I had a cast, I was back to normal life, just in a cast. I had no friends, so I had no one to sign my cast. In fact, kids made fun of me because I had no signatures on my cast. Ironically, I did not want random kids writing on me, on my cast, so the joke was on them. I did not want what they mocked me for not having. I still suffered a lisp though as a young child up until 3rd grade. But now in 1st grade, with my broken arm and cast plus a lisp, I was the easy target of elementary school yard mockery, insults, and physical abuse. Yard duties charged with protecting students spent more time gabbing about their personal lives than watching me get beat up or chased or yelled at. No one cared about me, that was obvious. I was in 1st grade, and now had a cast on my arm that I would wear for over 6 months given how bad the break was. Over those 6 months, it itched. It itched so much. I used an old bent hanger to scratch it within. Within a few months, it was rank. It stank. It smelled easily a foot away from it. But the doctor said never wash it, never do anything but wrap it up in a bag if you go near water, take a bath, etc. At school, it was rather convenient though. My cast was a portable club that no one could take from me. You may infer from that statement that I was teased and sometimes shoved around to the point that I would feel I needed a club. Once a kid threw rocks at me all recess long, and I had a silly idea that maybe if I stood still, somehow he could not hit me because, he was so inaccurate. Well, that was not intelligent. It hit me square between the eyes and sent me to the nurse's office and then home. I was dumb. Ouch. I learned that day, it is up to me to avoid being hurt. And do not believe unproven crazy ideas. Rely on what you know. Well, things did change having that cast. I had a club permanently attached to my arm, and like I said, no one could take it away. I used it. I hammered my assailants, and they fled. Where did they flee? Straight to the yard duties to say that I was picking on them with my cast. They lied and portrayed their abusive bully selves that they were the victims. The yard duties would grab me by my unbroken arm and drag me to the principal's office, who promptly assumed that I was a bully using my club cast arm. No one listened to my explanations of my abuse or insults or mockery. They just cast judgment and called my mother and sent a note with me home for her to sign that said I would not hit anyone with my cast again. My mother listened as she signed the note. I was harassed the next day as the real bullies knew that I was told not to use my cast. Well, I was true to my word and I did not use my cast as a club anymore. Instead, I used my aluminum Scooby-Doo lunch pail and smacked people with that. I took my pail everywhere. The kids gave up messing with me. It was clear to me, weapons evened the playing field, and they make people less mean. Weapons are your friends. Let's get back to the Thunderbolt pony story. Thunderbolt's aggressive, mean personality eventually made him into a pony pariah. No one rode Thunderbolt anymore. It had been over a year that anyone spent much time at all with Thunderbolt. He was left to sulk and be alone. He became even more surly and grumpy, without brushing or words of comfort. He had no sense of worth or value left. Thunderbolt was effectively abandoned by his family. Yes, it may seem weird, but horses have feelings too, just like any other animal. My pony Patches, more on that pony later, showed me how animals, including ponies, have very real human-like emotions and feelings. I felt so sorry for Thunderbolt as a being with feelings, because even if he broke my arm and I disliked him, I even hated him for hurting me so badly. There were few creatures I hated that much in my entire life. But all that still, Thunderbolt earned my hatred from breaking my arm. But I still felt sorry for him as a creature that was so sad. My parents decided Thunderbolt would have a better life with someone else that would care for him and ride him as he once was. A family in an adjacent city called Morgan Hill bought Thunderbolt for a steal, a very low price, because my parents just wanted him to find a new home. That evening, the new owners of Thunderbolt had him on a rope running in circles on their property with a training whip so that he would get used to them as the masters and not be mean to them as he had been mean to everyone his entire life. Apparently, Thunderbolt yanked free of the would-be trainer and galloped away beyond their sight. He ran, and they could not find him. Thunderbolt, the mean pony, had escaped his new owners, and he knew where home was. He fled his would-be new home and ran along the streets towards his San Martin home. It may not be where he had much joy, but it was where he lived and where he belonged. As an aside, the wealthiest family in the area owned a series of fruit stands. They would buy fruit directly from local farms, including the less aesthetic fruits, the ugly fruits, that retail stores would not put out for sale because their appearance was too unacceptable, even though the food was otherwise completely good and fine to eat. People are fickle about what foods look like, whether they're edible or not, regardless of nutritional value. Looks matter, even in food, for people. The Merinos had a dark reputation, however. They allegedly did not make the lion's share of their income from those fruit stands, at least not directly. They instead laundered money and sold illicit drugs through their fruit stand business. The fruit stands provided convenient drug access points throughout the South County, and the fruit sales provided cover for revenue to legitimize it for everyday use. The Merino family was seen as the local mob, and they were advised everyone stay clear. I lived across the street from the Merino family. They operated as if they were above the law and lived life as libertines. They pursued lavish cars, vacations, and gluttonous lifestyles. It was a huge contrast to our squalid, low-income house across the street. There were occasions when the Merinos would offer to buy my parents' house so they could just tear it down, as it was an eyesore to them, and arguably lowered the property value of their home, if not all properties in the area. One of the Merinos' sons, Jace, was a truck driver for their fruit stand business. He was no exception to the Merinos' feeling above the law, libertine mindset. Jace Merino would often drink and drive, and so saw no risk in doing so this night too, as it was like every other night. Wait for a load, drive to the fruit stands, wait for the unload, drive to a fruit stand, repeat, and drive home. Well, Jace felt that his simple, repeating, and very boring job afforded him the luxury of being able to do his job half drunk. Of course, he would limit his drinking just enough so that he could operate a big rig safely. Jace had been lucky for years, drinking and driving a huge semi. The morning after Thunderbolt was sold, a knock came from the kitchen door. It was the local deputy. San Martin did not have a police department since it was not an official city, and so had a sheriff and deputies as law enforcement, as a county. It's called an unincorporated area. The officer asked if we owned a dark brown pony. They had been going door to door asking local homeowners with corrals and horses if they were missing a dark brown pony. My mother explained that we had just sold a dark brown pony named Thunderbolt just last night. She wondered why the officer was wondering if we owned such an animal. Apparently, there had been an accident with a dark brown pony just a few miles away, and since we had just sold such a pony, they asked if we might go and look at the victim animal and identify it. Thunderbolt never made it home to San Martin. The deputy had cautioned the pony died but declined to say how it happened. That fateful evening, Jace Marino was not so lucky driving his Peterbilt semi, truck, and trailer, half drunk. Jace plowed his massive rig over Thunderbolt as the pony tried to run home. Whether the pony hits the truck or the truck hits the pony, it's bad for the pony. Thunderbolt was caught under the truck's grill and dragged nearly 200 feet across the road surface. One side of his body was left hairless, much of his flesh scraped and ripped off those 200 feet as he tumbled and ripped under the vehicle out the back, crushed, twisted, and mutilated. As we arrived, Cynthia, my eldest sister, saw Thunderbolt and leapt from the car to run to what was left of him. She fell next to him and held him close. Tears flowed. She raised his head to hug it, but it fell backward, revealing his head was half severed from the neck. Blood gushed from the exposed head all over Cynthia. It was a horrifying scene. I will never forget that horror. I think no matter how much my memory fades, that memory I witnessed that day will stay. He had it coming, I thought, which kind of made me feel guilty. Thunderbolt broke my arm. He was mean. He was an awful animal. If there was a demon in animal form, it was Thunderbolt. But he was part of my life, and I did give him my love. He gave me excitement and happiness, if not broken bones and scars. In a strange way, I lamented the loss of my old friend Thunderbolt, whereas I felt the evolved, new, and mean Thunderbolt perhaps deserved karmic justice. Had it coming. I was conflicted with my disdain for Thunderbolt while feeling for him and my sister. Seeing Thunderbolt's gruesome end and my sister's unimaginable nightmarish bloodbath shower made me feel sad and horrified and speechless. My life has been full of larger-than-life events, full of extraordinary adventures and events, even nightmares in those events. Beyond any Hollywood overly dramatic narrative, my life and these things were real.